Hello, Caroline. There's me laughing. Just telling Caroline I've had 4 this morning, so I apologise if I'm a bit overexcited. My name is Beth Upton. I am the CEO and founder of Money Tree Fundraising, and we are the hosts of the Trust Fundraising Hub on Facebook. And I want to welcome here today, in fact, on this side of me, let's see if I can make my hand work, Caroline Danks, who I have worked with for many years and is the founder and who runs LarkOwl. Caroline, over to you. Introduce yourself.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Caroline Danks. I have also had 4 coffees, which is wild. And I'm also getting over a bit of some kind of illness. I think it was COVID, but the test said otherwise. We will never know. But if I suddenly get a hacking cough, I'm really sorry. That's really unprofessional and unpleasant. And I can mute myself if that happens. I am co-founder and director of LarkOwl. We're a fundraising consultancy primarily. We support charities with high value income. So that's trusts and major gifts, capital appeals, and also commercial income and business development. And yeah, I'm just excited to be here to talk about trust fundraising. Obviously, trust fundraising is where I started my career. And we're going to talk also about benchmarking and return on investment, because for the past 3 years, LarkOwl have produced, I say it like LarkOwl is like this sort of massive multi-agency thing. It's really not. It's me has produced a report on the return on investment for different types of fundraising. So by return on investment, we mean how much money can you expect to raise from different types of fundraising? And we express that as the average amount raised per pound spent. So obviously, I can't see any questions or anything, Beth. Are there questions? Is there chat? But yeah, let's talk about that today.
Yeah, and I really want to, because I've been a huge champion of this report, and I'm really grateful to you for having put in the time and effort to do it. We used to, back in the day, have a report managed through the Institute of Fundraising called Fund Ratios. One of the challenges I always had with it was that it was sort of the top 20 fundraising organisations. My first ever job in fundraising was at Macmillan, and I used to, one of my annual jobs, fun, was doing my department's fund ratio input for the year. So I knew Macmillan took part, and it was anonymised. I mean, we're talking, I worked there nearly 20 years ago. I'm sure I'm not breaking any trade secrets by breaking that little anonymity there. So it was anonymised, and unless you paid to be a member, you didn't know who else was a member. And you got a bit more detail. But then once it was a year out of date, the Institute of Fundraising would publish last year's data. And it was annoying because it was the big fundraising organisation. So as long as you're working for one of those, fine. But otherwise, really difficult to work out whether those returns on investment are relevant because you don't know who they are. Having said that, I think the last fund ratios was in 2013, and we have had nothing since then, and it's just not good enough. Now, I just want a quick comment on questions. There's several people following us, and I've just actually logged into Facebook, which is why I look like I'm looking to one side. I've got my 2 screens, and I'm streaming this through a piece of software called StreamYard, which I'm trialing today in the hope that in the new year I will be able to broadcast our lives across multiple channels, so across LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook and maybe even YouTube, all live at the same time. Now, what I hadn't realised was they were going to write something on my post, and it says, "I'm going live using StreamYard. Before leaving a comment, please grant StreamYard permission." Don't do that, people. Just write comments, because I can see it on Facebook over there, and I can also I can look at it over here as well, hopefully. So please do ask questions of Caroline, of me, whether it's about return on investment or other aspects of trust fundraising, and just kind of dig in as normal. And if I can't see the comments here, I'll see them over there on my Facebook screen.
Yeah, and I'm not going to look at Facebook. I'm just going to close everything else down and just concentrate on you, Beth. So I'll let you read the questions out.
No, not at all. So, I mean, there are no questions at the moment, but there's, 20 odd people watching us. So we should probably say something useful. So I wanted to ask you, obviously this year you did the report, and it's probably the first report that's really affected by COVID. And was there anything that you saw in the data that came out this year that you think points to COVID or points to anything else interesting that's different to previous years?
Yes, 100%. And I just want to be clear that when I compiled the data and compiled the report, and when I sent out the survey, I was really, really mindful to not just take the data at face value and to make assumptions on the numbers alone, because I think that's where benchmarking return on investment goes really wrong. It's where people only look at the data and then they make an assumption. I made sure that there was lots of space in the survey for people to write free-form answers about the things that they were experiencing and how they were feeling about it.
Mm-hmm.
And overwhelmingly, so when we look at the trust fundraising data, the trust fundraising return on investment was higher this year than it had been the last year. So the average return on investment for charities doing trust fundraising was £10.69 raised for every £1 spent. And that is for trust fundraising. That doesn't include grants.
Wow.
So no lottery, no heritage lottery, no sort of government contract stuff. So for trusts, it was £10.69 compared with last year, which was £10.05.
Mm-hmm.
And that was from a data set of only 45 charities. So this is not a scientifically accurate study. Though when we look back at the last fund ratios report in 2013, the return on investment for trusts and foundations was £9.56 raised for every £1 spent. So it's not completely off the mark. Now, the telling bit was in the testimony and the written responses that we got from people. And overwhelmingly, trust fundraisers were saying, we've actually had a good year. We've had a lot of opportunities that have been open to us, opportunities that were open because of COVID, and opportunities that had not previously been available. So we've actually had a really, really good year. There were many charities that said, actually, for the first time, we feel like we can plan ahead because we have the funds that we've always dreamed of having. So there's almost been like some sort of, I don't want to say this word, I'm going to say stockpiling, but not stockpiling. There's been some significant income increases for many of the charities that responded to the survey. There were a couple of charities that said, one of them said we had to furlough our one and only fundraiser, and the people that were left working at the charity simply couldn't keep up with the number of trust opportunities that were open. So we just couldn't submit the applications. So we didn't get a lot of emergency funding. There was one charity, it's an environmental charity, that just said we just weren't eligible for anything, which horrifies me on many levels. But a lot of charities had a really good year. They were also then saying in their written testimony, we've had a good year this year, but we're really, really aware that these funds were very much a one-off and that they won't be available in future years.
Yeah.
And getting that message across to our leaders, to our trustees, is not easy. And for some reason, they're not, in all cases, hearing us, and we feel like our targets for the coming year are completely unrealistic. And that was the overwhelming message. The number one issue that came back through the study this year was of a good year for trusts, but an expectation that subsequent years were going to be more tricky.
It's really disappointing, isn't it? Because and I think there's several things that disappoint me in that, and I don't want to focus entirely on the negative, because I mean, wow, did we watch trust fundraisers? And also, we were the trust fundraisers as well. Let's not be funny, Caroline. You were working for clients, I was working for clients, my whole team was working for clients. We were those trust fundraisers working our socks off, and we saw it across the board, didn't we, of not just increased opportunity, which is excellent, but that means increased workload in light of a lot of furloughing, so probably less less access to service delivery staff, less access to finance staff, potentially part-time furloughed when that became a thing as well. All of that sort of that jarring between team members who were furloughed, team members who weren't, who took on the responsibility. And it was a really busy, stressful time. And what I also witnessed, particularly with in-house fundraisers, was a sense of burden. It was on them to keep their organisations going, that these opportunities did exist. They only existed within trust fundraising, and therefore they felt, and I'm sure for a lot of them it was put on themselves, that no one overtly said that, but that's because we're all passionate for who we work for, and that pressure was really busy. And I think my disappointment not only is that some fundraisers were furloughed, I mean, I think that's a sentence in and of itself, but that organisations just don't seem to get that was a one-off reaction, that group of donors stepped up to support us in a genuine crisis. But they're not going to carry on doing that. That crisis funding is over. And as a result, we probably, this is my extrapolation into the future based on my experience, need to expect a reduction in trust fundraising income from pre-COVID levels for a while, because I expect that a lot of trusts have eaten into their reserves and that they will want to rebuild those back up before they go back to pre-COVID funding levels. And so actually the pressure should be fully and firmly taken off those people. And I'm really disappointed to hear that's not.
It is disappointing and frustrating for sure. A really interesting stat from our benchmarking report this year around furloughing. So we had, as I say, we had 45 charities respond, and so 42 of those responded to the question about furloughing. So of 42, 29 furloughed all or part of their fundraising team, and 13 didn't at all furlough their fundraising teams.
Okay.
Charities that did furlough all or part of their fundraising team, 58% of those charities increased their income and 72% increased their return on investment. Now, for the charities that retained their fundraising teams throughout the pandemic, 69% increased their income and 76% increased their return on investment.
Yeah.
So I think that is a useful piece of data, and speaks to the fact that fundraising works. And yes, it is for me. One of the themes that I'm seeing at the moment. Obviously, you mentioned and alluded to the burden that we take on as trust fundraisers, and the fact that those who weren't furloughed were working their socks off, and those additional opportunities were often presented to us with very short timescales and short deadlines. So there is definitely a wellbeing burnout issue that was highlighted in the report, but in also other things that I've seen. I think I've just lost my train of thought, but yeah, well-being, burnout, responsibility. That was something else that came through really, really strongly.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. We're getting a few questions. I'm just going to go through them before I lose my place.
Yeah.
One is from people, you have to bear in mind, I can't see your name if I'm reading this on StreamYard. That seems to be the permission thing. So there's someone here saying that they are a medical research charity, so didn't really do fantastically well with the grants from COVID, obviously, because there was no sort of COVID urgency, and that their ROI is considerably less than that £10 for £1 spent this year, and was wondering how difficult it would be, and would you consider breaking down those ROIs by sector in future, perhaps if your sample size grows?
That would be great. Yes, I have all sorts of ambitions for this study and for where it could go in the future. I love the idea of breaking down by sector. At the moment, we break it down by size of charity, and we literally kind of split it into two. It's charities that have an income of 1 million plus and charities under 1 million. It would be great to break down by sector. It would be great to also have a look at it sort of geographically, would be really interesting. The issue is resource. No one pays me to do this. I did have a meeting with the Institute of Fundraising at the very beginning of the project, and I went to them and they saw me and I explained my intention to do this project, and they did not want to pay me to do it, which is fine.
Well, it is difficult, and I think it would be well. I can see getting a sponsor as well, because there's all sort of calls on you when you get sponsors and things like that, and I recognise that it's difficult for you to do, and it's very easy for me to go, thank you so much for doing this, and I do mean it, but particularly thank you so much for doing this despite not having an external sponsor of any form, because I think you are more likely to offer a true vision of something. I mean, what I would like to see is not necessarily their financial involvement, but I would like to see the Institute of Fundraising asking all of its members officially to take part in this exercise, and just a recognition that benchmarking against our peers is useful.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, the other very intentional decision was that I did not want to put this information behind a paywall, because there are benchmarkings that exist for charities that can afford to participate. I don't know how much it costs to participate in some of the studies that do exist. I think Open do a benchmarking study, which is really good and really comprehensive, because they have the funding to be able to break down by sector and also by charity size. It would be great to be able to break down in more granular detail. So yeah, no plans to do that at present, but this is important for the sector, and I do see it as a long-term project. I'll probably take a break from it next year, but then after that, who knows? Who knows? It is important and it is useful. So
maybe you pass the baton on, having done all the hard work. Perhaps you pass the baton on and someone else takes it on, and it's a group voluntary thing. Who knows? I think there are lots of options.
Yeah.
Someone here has commented that the idea of stockpiling is really interesting, and they see this where they're a newish trustee, and the questions are, how do we drive home messages around the needs to actively manage reserves? And then there's a comment further on. I'm going to come back to that person's second question later on. There's another comment about, thank goodness we did have reserves last year, absolutely, and yet we're still getting turned down for applications if our reserves are too high. So what do you have as advice for anyone about reserves and trust applications?
Yeah, I'm hearing this so much at the moment, because there are charities that have reserves, and there are trusts that are turning charity applications down on the basis of, you have too much in reserve. I mean, I would say two things to fundraisers. Firstly, you as a trust fundraiser, you cannot affect or impact the level of reserves that a charity holds. That's not your responsibility. That's not your job. So don't get sort of stressed out and worried about this thing that you actually have no control over. What is your job is to articulate very clearly why your reserves are what they are. And I'm going through this with a client at the moment that has on paper very high reserves. And, before we apply to any trusts, any new trusts, I need to be able to explain very, very clearly why those reserves are what they are, what the rationale is for having those reserves, what the goal is, what happens when the charity meets that goal, why that goal is where it is, what the future ambitions of the charity are that will require them to save up, if you like. I mean, this is a charity, a medical charity, whose equipment costs and sort of capital overheads are significant. So they really do need large reserves. I would also really, really sort of question the notion as to whether high reserves are a bad thing. I've done fundraising before where trusts have willingly and happily given to charities that on paper look like they have too much in reserve. Actually, it can be reassuring that a charity is going to exist in the coming years, and high reserves would suggest that they are more likely to exist than a charity that is living hand to mouth and that only has a couple of months in free reserve. So yeah, my advice for fundraisers is don't get hung up on something that you can't control. Though obviously I recognise that a trustee has asked this question. And whether you're a fundraiser or a trustee, make sure that when you're talking to people outside of your charity, you can articulate very, very clearly why your reserves are where they are, and what your future plans are, and how that sort of justifies having the level of reserves that you have.
I absolutely agree. I've got, I'm thinking of one client who have a residential unit in Bangladesh. Obviously, Bangladesh is a very flood-prone region, as is the area where they're based. And they carry what amounts to an enormous reserve, because if their residential unit is wiped out by flood, that is what it will cost. They've literally done the maths, and that is what it will cost. And as soon as they worked that out, and then they have a smaller amount that is around the wind down costs of the organisation in the UK. And so when you combine them together, it looks like a year's running costs, basically, because it is the practical nature of rehoming people who are then homeless due to a flood. Disaster in an uninsurable location on the planet. You cannot get insurance, therefore you've got to have it in cash, right? Otherwise you're not being responsible to the people you're offering a home to. So I think as long as your organisation can articulate it, and I guess my experience is that a lot of organisations squirrel away money out of fear, and that the trustees, and I put this back to the trustee who's talking about reserves, is as a trustee, one of the things you can do is really challenge your fellow trustees as to the rationale of why the reserve levels are set as they are. You know, is that a sensible sum of money? Is it justifiable? Or have you got your justifiable sum and then some as well because you're really, really worried? Or you've got this justifiable sum that you're actually then never allowing any spare to make that up. You know, I think it goes both ways.
I think what's probably more important than reserves at the moment is your day-to-day income and expenditure, and ensuring that that is balanced. Because if you've got a giant reserve but you're spending, you know, more than you are raising year on year, then ultimately that reserve will run down one day and you will cease to exist. So I think those are probably more important metrics for charity leaders to be considering over and above the reserves question.
I absolutely agree, Caroline. So there's one person here who wants to make sure that I tell you how much they appreciate your hard work putting them together. So thank you very much. And someone else who's asked if you could repeat the stats and the percentages. So rather than that, is it possible? Do you have access to this comment thing on StreamYard? Can you send a link or put it on Facebook at the end of this live on our broadcast, the link to your report, so that anyone who's not caught all the facts and stats from what you're saying knows where they can go and find it? That'd be really good. Thank you.
Yeah, I will add. I'll add a link at the end of the session. I'll go into the Facebook group and make sure the link is there, and you can download the reports from our website.
So this might be our last question. It's amazing how much longer a question lasts when there's two of us discussing it. As consultants, do we have, either of us or both of us, any advice on managing internal relationships? I guess this might be part of that reserves and pushing people back their responsibility, and getting the information you need for applications from teams who are busy delivering projects, and probably also still kind of coming out of that aftermath of COVID. You go first.
I don't know. I don't know if this was the thing that I was particularly good at when I worked in-house as a fundraiser. I'm quite a bullish person. I'm just like, if you want the money, you give me the information.
Yeah, me too, I'm afraid.
Sorry, that's how it works. Planning is great. So what you don't want to do is miss a deadline. So make sure you're asking for information in really good time. I mean, it seems obvious, but it is easy to miss that information and to miss a deadline. So, you know, make sure that your annual planning is builds in buffers for gathering that information. Make sure that you are asking people in really, really good time, and make sure that the relationships, make sure you've identified who those key people are in an organisation, because there are projects probably that are really attractive to funders. So, you know, whoever manages that one project, if you can be going to one person on behalf of several funders, you're reducing your workload, and you are going to increase your return on investment ultimately. through, just through efficiency of economy of scale.
Yeah.
So, good relationships, just generally. So, and that's probably hard, isn't it? Now we're working more remotely. That's not as easy to cultivate. It's not as authentic online. If you can get face to face with people just for a catch up, I know that might feel difficult at the moment. It might feel a bit indulgent almost. It might be what some people are really craving. So it might be just a joyful thing, just to go for a coffee with someone in your charity that your funders are keen to hear from. And remember that you're the conduit, you're the advocate for your donors, and it is your responsibility to get them the information that they need. Be really, really clear with people in your organisation that you're not being difficult. You're not asking difficult questions for the sake of being difficult because you want to know. You're doing it because you want to do the best application that you can do, and this is simply the question that the funder is asking. So I think just make sure you're building in as much time as possible, so you're not rushing people at the last minute. And if you've got good internal relationships to start with, that will be easier.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with all of that. I think the worst example of an organisation is that I can think of is one that was predominantly funded through contracts. And I'm sure this must be true for some of the people watching today. And therefore, contracts were given this kind of higher priority, if you like. And fundraising was a very small percentage of the overall organisational income. And so it wasn't seen as a priority. And when that shift started to change, they changed in ways that didn't hugely impact on the service delivery team. They drew in corporate fundraising and things like that. So it was less onerous in terms of reports. And I would say that there was some senior staff who didn't. So this is kind of recognizing as a trust fundraiser, there are limits to what you can do. If you're just a trust fundraiser and you're not also the chief exec and you're not also the director of fundraising and things like that, then there are limits actually. And this isn't all your responsibility, even if it is the information you need to do your job. Sometimes you need to make your boss do things. And some of that is in the understanding that when you ask for information, it isn't to be a pain in the neck. It is to make money, to make the project happen. And I think when organizations have been accustomed to just the money coming in, it can be difficult to then ask staff to pause and do what is essentially extra work for them in order to make the money coming in. So I think, and as you go into that, knowing that for them, you're asking extra to what used to be asked of them, you can really be quite respectful of the fact that whilst it is important, it is also a burden. Two things can be true at the same time. And what can your organisation do to recognise that the same member of staff who already probably worked too many hours is now being asked to do even more within those too many hours? Mm-hmm. So there's that part of the conversation. I absolutely agree with you, Caroline. The more time you can give people, I think we're all a bit guilty sometimes of a rush to a deadline. I work really well to deadlines, but that means I work at the last minute. That's what that means when you say you work well to deadlines, right? Everyone I know who works well to deadlines works at the last minute, and that's not fair. That's just fundamentally not fair on other people to push your urgency onto them. So anything that could be part of the annual planning process, that could be part of their team days. I mean, and again, it's just relationships, and that is harder at the moment. Is there any reciprocal volunteering opportunity? Could you spend some time in that service delivery team, observing them, taking part, and actually getting under the skin of the service, which will help you be better at your job, and also offer them some genuine help? Like if they're looking for volunteers for things, is there something that you could do that's a bit above and beyond the day-to-day, having a coffee, that would really help? I know some organisations do a sort of lunch and learn where they invite fundraising into services and services into fundraising, and it's anything that's kind of above and beyond that proves that as a fundraising team you are also helping in a non-financial way, in a more instant way that can be recognised.
That's a great idea. Another thing I would recommend is just with a fine-tooth comb, go over that funder criteria. So I had a whole story once. I was I was doing a trust application. It wasn't a massive amount of money, but it was important. It was significant. I had gone through the criteria. I had filled in the application form. I was submitting it online, and on the last page it said, please upload your written referral from your independent person and your written referral from your board member here. This is like with 3 days to go. And this is when I was working for a massive national charity. Like, you can't just email a board member. It was...
Oops. Yeah.
Yeah.
And obviously there's Fix the Form going on, which is a campaign to make funding applications easier. And both Caroline and I do recognise that sometimes that can't be helped. Like, you literally get to the last page to press submit, but that means you definitely don't get to that last page 3 days before the deadline. You have to do it earlier if you can't see the questions in advance. And we are working on that. Caroline, thank you so much for your time. It's been really nice doing this with someone, and I might indulge myself and invite you to our larger multi-stream event in the new year. So this is our last live for 2021. I am not. Oh, one last quick question that's come in. I am going to let us answer it. How long do you think it would take for success rate for cold applications to rise? Oh, I don't know that we can answer that. I mean, so I can't even remember off the top of my head how long it took after the financial crash for things to get back to normal, but I want to say 3 to 5 years. Like, it took a while for the stock market. So, and it's very different because the financial crash meant that the stock market dropped as well as our fundraising income dropped. Whereas this time, weirdly, stock market thriving, despite us all feeling like we might be in a weird financial place because of the cost of petrol and stuff. So it is a very different time, and I don't think we can predict, but I'm going to guess, because there's always a lag between the investments being made, the return on investments, and the giving away of that. So I would still say it could take 3 years for us to see something back to normal.
And I'm going to say something political now, but for as long as the size of our state continues to shrink, as long as local authority budgets are shrinking and shrinking, charities are going to be expected to step into the breach, which means greater competition. And I don't see greater competition slowing down or reducing anytime soon. I can only see it increasing, which is why stewardship is absolutely critical right now. Using your connections is problematic, but it's necessary. And continuity and, where possible, a reduction in staff turnover. I know that's not necessarily... respecting
all of the people in this group either.
I know that's not.
And I agree with all of that, and I would say that the other thing, and again, I would say it probably isn't relevant for the people taking the time to watch us, but hopefully others will watch it as well. Read those criteria, apply personally, tailor your applications. Do not do blanket mailings. That is going to be even worse with additional competition than it ever was, and I always thought it was pretty awful. So on that sort of bombshell note, I'm going to say thank you, Caroline, for real. Definitely no more questions. I'm not going to look. And it's been a pleasure to talk to you as always. And I do enjoy having someone else to chew the fat over about our sector. This is our last live on the Trust Fundraising Hub for 2021. I am taking December. I'm not taking December off. I'm taking December off from Q&As. I'm working really hard. That's why I'm not doing the Q&A. So our next one will be on Thursday, the 20th of January. It will be live here on the Trust Fundraising Hub on Facebook, but also, as StreamYard wasn't a complete disaster, and I can tell that some people can read us, I'm also planning to simultaneously go live on LinkedIn and on Twitter, and perhaps on YouTube as well. That last one's a bit up for grabs. So please do tell your friends and your colleagues who are in our sector that this is available, and it's now going to be available for people who don't want to, or for whatever reason can't join us on Facebook. And have wonderful Christmases. I'm obviously on the group most days, and I will answer questions if I can between now and then. But otherwise, I'll see you all in the new year. And thanks again, Caroline, and bye for now, everyone.